Oy bu dağlar kimin? Oy Kaz Dağları, tanrıların yuvası. Oy Kaz Dağları, tanrıların yuvası. Kıyar mı insan toprağa suya, ne kalır yarınlara? Kıyar mı insan toprağa suya, ne kalır yarınlara? Oy bu dağlar kimin? Oy bu dağlar kimin?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to one more episode of the Raid Radio Show. Today, we hosted our episode Eleni Mitsou from Xekinima, an organization of the anticapitalist left in Greece, and a member of the ISA, International Socialist Alternative. We will be discussing about COVID-19 and the environment, how the destruction of nature and the intensive animal farming give birth to pandemic, but also about the destruction of the planet from the use of plastics, something that we can see every year in our beaches. But finally, how can we fight to reverse the situation, to stop the destruction, and fight for a new society which can protect the environment and put an end to the exploitation, poverty, and hunger that characterize capitalist system from its inception. Hello, Eleni. Welcome to our show.
Hi, Athina. Thanks very much for inviting me.
So, Eleni, we in Cyprus, at least, we just came out of as the scientists characterized, of the first wave or the peak of the pandemic. The governments around the world pretended to be taken by surprise by the virus. However, in the course of the last 3 months, there were many scientists that said that many governments around the world knew about it, and they were warned by the scientific community about the coming of a virus. What do you think about that?
Well, it's true. I mean, the pandemic of COVID-19 didn't really take everyone by surprise. I mean, for more than a decade, there were dozens of scientists around the world that have been warning of the outbreak of pandemics due to superviruses from animals and also from microbes resistant to antibiotics, and they have called on governments to take action. I mean, and the warnings didn't come from fringe voices or just individual scientists. There have been forecasts of such pandemics in the UN Food and Agriculture Organization studies. I can give you two examples. The World Livestock Report of 2013, and also we can go back as far as 2007, and we see in the Industrial Livestock Production and Global Health Risks report reporting about the danger of such viruses originating from animals developing and evolving into pandemics. But also the risks have been acknowledged by the US and other secret services, and there are many examples of these. And also very famous scientists, as for example, Dr. Webster, who's the expert of the World Health Organization on the flu, on the flu virus and influenza. And he has been specializing in the interface between humans and animals. And he has been warning of a deadly pandemic for almost 60 years. And he has been focusing on some viruses, and the one that really worries him in the past 20 years is the H5N1 virus. It's a flu virus, which kills around 50% of the humans it infects. And what limits this virus, the H5N1, so far is that it's very difficult to transmit from human to human, in contrast to the high degree of contagion of the coronavirus, the virus that's of the epidemic, of today's epidemic.
So despite these warnings, which from the institutions that you mentioned, the serious institutions of the capitalist system itself, searching for these things, despite these warnings, the governments around the world have not taken any substantial steps to reduce the incidence of such viruses, or they were not prepared for a pandemic. Why?
Because in order to take action to stop the emergence and the spreading of these viruses, they would have to fight again. It would bring them into conflict with big business interests, and especially the big business interests that destroy the forest ecosystems, like the industrial agriculture, the logging companies, the mining multinationals that are mining all of the global south, including Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey. And it would also bring them into conflict with one of the most powerful businesses in the world, which is the intensive animal farming industry. And also, the governments would have to invest in research on the treatment of virus. They would have to invest and equip and shield the public health systems. And these are policies that cost a lot of money, but they bring no returns. They don't bring profits to the big capital. And that's why the capitalist governments don't apply these policies, and they try to escape these and avoid these kind of issues.
You mentioned the parts of the industry before that they will have to come in conflict. How is it connected with the development of the viruses? How do these viruses develop?
One way is through the destruction of animal habitats, the change in the dynamics in their populations, as well as the change in the dynamics and the balance between human and animal populations that leads to the transmission of new viruses or new virus strains from animals to humans. And these can develop into epidemics and pandemics. And I can give you a couple of concrete examples. In the 1980s, large logging companies started cutting down forests in Central and West Africa, in the Congo Basin. One of the consequences, of logging on a massive scale was the building of roads, which allowed hunters to penetrate deeper into the forests and gain access to more prey. In addition, we had the use of rifles, which of course accompanied the colonization of the African company. And the use of rifles made hunting much more efficient. Now, workers at the logging companies, at the mines and the oil fields operating in the cleared forest areas began consuming bushmeat more often. And also the newly constructed roads and the operation of large trucks enabled the transferring of more prey into the cities. So the destruction of huge parts of African tropical forests was accompanied by a very big rise, a steep rise in bushmeat trade, including meat from gorillas, meat from chimpanzees. And that brought the viruses of these two species of gorillas and chimpanzees into a much more frequent contact with a much greater number of people compared to the past. So the transmission of viruses from one species to another became much easier. One of these viruses was the deadly Ebola virus, and also it was through a similar process that and also some significant social change in Congo imposed by the Belgian colonialist rule in the early 19th century that made the AIDS virus to spread in the second half of the 19th century. And I think we all know that AIDS was one of the worst viral epidemics in the world, and it was a virus that was passed to humans through chimpanzees. And there are many other examples we could bring. For example, a study, a 2010 study in Brazil found that for every 4% of forest devastation, the incidence of malaria in humans increased by 50%, and they identified the mechanisms through which this happened. But I think there's a second way, which is also very important, how these viruses develop, to mention. And this way, it's through intensive animal farming, and especially through factory farming practices. Rob Wallace, which is a well-known evolutionary biologist at the Agroecology and Rural Economics Research Institute in St. Paul, Minnesota, he said that factory farms are the best way to select for the most dangerous pathogens possible. And pathogens are viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites. And the reality of factory farming is nothing like we see on commercial advertisements, like cows grazing in the meadows or chickens strolling in big barns. I mean, the real picture, the reality of factory farming is hundreds of thousands of animals immobilized with metal bars or in cages. They stand for much of the day in their feces. They are away from the sun, and this is important because the sun's ultraviolet radiation kills viruses, among other things. And these conditions, they increase the stress on the animals dramatically. They weaken their immune system severely. And this huge concentration in numbers of these animals' populations, these create similar conditions to those in the trenches and the barracks of the soldiers in World War I. And that's where the deadliest flu pandemic in modern history broke out, the Spanish flu. And it's interesting the way Wallace explains how these viruses emerge from and evolve in factory farms. And I think it's best if I quote him. I quote a part. Mm-hmm. He says, if you're a pathogen in a host, you don't want to kill your host too fast before you can get into the next host. Otherwise, you're cutting off your own line of transmission. So there's a cap on how much of a badass you can be. The faster you replicate, the more likely you end up killing your host before the next host can come along. If you're deep in the wilderness or on a small farm, you, meaning the pathogen, are not going to regularly come across hosts. So you have to keep your virulence or harm inflicted on the host pretty low so that you don't run out of hosts. But if you get into a barn with 50,000 turkeys or 250,000 layered chickens, you can just burn right through. There's no cap on you being a badass. Mm-hmm. So this is, I think it's a very good quote. It gives a very good picture how viruses and eventually epidemics can emerge and do emerge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, in the beginning of the pandemic, everybody focused on this animal, pangolino, that was a wild animal that was bred in China for human consumption. So, as you said, the reason that they were eating it is because they were going further in the wild. And I have to say that some racists were even very fast to say that, look at these primitive Chinese people do. But I was reading an article today in a newspaper in Cyprus that a similar virus has been found in pig farming, and they were warning that a new pandemic will come out of this virus from the pig farming. So, as you say, industrial farming is very important. And in reality, most of the animal rights activists that they are the ones that they are raising the points and they are against the intensification of the animal farming. They do that though, and they focus on the welfare of the animals. But that, as you say, modern industrial mass capitalist animal farming is harmful for humans as well, something that nobody is realizing.
Well, I think racists do tend to ignore that things we eat might seem very primitive or cruel in other parts of the world. I mean, I know in Greece, in Cyprus, and in Turkey, we do enjoy snails. We do eat eel. We do eat octopus, and these kinds of animals. If I think most people in Northern Europe would find it disgusting eating snails and octopus, but also they would find it very cruel that we eat rabbits and things they keep as pets.
Mm-hmm. And we have a comment as well saying kokorets. It's a very popular food in Greece, Cyprus, and Turkey that again would be found very criminal.
But it's also, I mean, the industrialization of meat production. Through this industrialization of meat production, the food multinationals have promoted a culture of really excessive meat consumption in the Western world. People have ended up eating meat up to 3 times a day instead of just a few times a week or 1 time a week that previous generations would eat. And overconsumption of meat is detrimental to human health, especially red meat, causing, among other things, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancer, etc. And of course, intensive animal farming drains huge amounts of natural resources. And another reality of factory farming is that the conditions in which animals live in the intensive animal farms, they often lead to the emergence and spread of disease. So in order to prevent situations that would reduce their profits and also to promote the growth of the animals in the industry, they administer antibiotics to the livestock preemptively on a regular basis as part of their feed also very often. And scientists warn that these practices lead to the development of microbes resistant to all known antibiotics. And already in Europe, 23,000 people die each year from antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And in the United States, this number is estimated to be 25,000. And scientists predict that by 2050, these deaths will reach 10 million a year worldwide, and they will be exceeding the number of cancer deaths. Now, I've seen the reports on the new viruses the new virus discovered in the pig farms. But we forget that the swine flu in 2009, it was an epidemic that killed around almost 19,000 people worldwide. It was contained sooner than the coronavirus. I think the reaction was more, let's say, fast in that case. But that was a new strain of the H1N1 flu, the flu, yeah. And it emerged in the industrial pig farms, not of Asia, but of North America. And from there, it spread to humans. And actually, the US government tried to blame these to the Mexican pig farms, and they tried to label it the Mexican flu, as they do now with the coronavirus. Trump is trying to label it as the Chinese flu. But that virus originated from the industrial, the factory farms, factory pig farms in the US, in the southern states.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but so we are discussing, I mean, obviously the proposal for the solution of these pandemics and the change of the production is not, or I don't know, you will have to answer, go for everybody to go vegan. I mean, of course, there are communities and there are nations and countries that they do not consume meat at all, or they do consume much less. Not that they are immune of all these problems, like in India or Sri Lanka, Singapore, etc. I mean, they do have the same viruses around. But what can be done in this situation?
I think the environmental movement, the left, and everybody who's conscious on this issue, we should fight for a number of things. One is, of course, for an immediate end to the destruction of forests and all remaining ecosystems, because all remaining ecosystems are under attack. And then we really need a radical change in the modern capitalist agricultural and farming model. We need to replace intensive agriculture with ecological, sustainable agriculture and the use of traditional seed varieties. Not because we're nationalists, but because the traditional seeds have been adapted over centuries to the particular environment of each region. So they need less chemical support. They can grow better in the conditions of that region. And also we need to replace intensive animal farming with sustainable, extensive livestock farms, and also with the use of traditional animal breeds for each region, again, for the same reasons, because these breeds have developed through the centuries to cope in a better way with the with the conditions in that region. I mean, to give you an example, about a decade ago, or maybe a bit more, Limoges cows were imported in Greece, and they were left to graze on hills, on mountains, like the traditional Greek farmers would do. However, these cows were bred in Central Europe, and would their system, their cardiovascular system, was developed for a very not for harsh conditions. Anyway, these cows died of heart attacks because they were not they were either for closed farms or for the let's say the even land of Central Europe, not for the hills and the mountains of Greece. But anyway, we really need also mass education campaigns about the dangers of overconsumption of meat. And we also need a shift in the dietary model promoted in the world, in the West, away from meat overconsumption, and also in some cases also dairy overconsumption. And of course, if people choose to go vegetarian or vegan, I think it's a legitimate choice that should be respected, and it really would help in terms of the environment. And then, of course, we do need the establishment of cooperatives democratically run under conditions of full transparency, not the way they used to be, at least in Greece, to produce high quality, affordable food, and at the same time provide a living wage for all workers in agriculture and farming. And all of this is to be should be complemented, of course, with scientific and material support to the farmers and to the cooperatives from the state. You would need the state to also plan agriculture and animal farm production, and this planning should be done based on the real needs of society, and not the way it's done today, which is not planned at all, and all the production is based on the profits of the multinationals and not on what society needs. So that's I think the main things we should fight for.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Eleni, since we have you here, I would like to discuss something else that you worked a lot on it some time ago. It is something that everybody see around us lately. I would like to ask you some questions about plastic pollution and the discussion about banning of plastic. Now that the schools are over, most of the people would start going to the sea, and they will see the coast, especially in Cyprus, either north or south, they're full of plastic, the sea as well. So how much is the pollution of the plastic in the sea, in the Mediterranean?
Unfortunately, the Mediterranean is the sixth most polluted sea in the world in terms of plastic pollution. The estimates of the amount of plastics range from 4,800 tons to 30,300 tons. But the Mediterranean, it's a closed sea. It communicates with the Atlantic Ocean through the narrow Strait of Gibraltar. So its waters the Mediterranean waters are being renewed every 80 years. And because of this, the Mediterranean Sea has on average the highest density of plastics in the world, the highest density. It's very important. We have some studies estimate there are 250 billion microplastics in the Mediterranean, which is greater in terms of density than the garbage gyres in the Atlantic, the Pacific, and elsewhere. So it's a heavy polluted sea, unfortunately.
So some of the people they are starting to organize cleanups of the beaches. Does it help to stop this pollution? Can they make a change by just cleaning? I mean, by doing these cleanups? Of course, they clean the place that we will use. This is good. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not good, but does it stop the plastic pollution?
It doesn't. I mean, it's. I think it's a good initiative to clean the beaches. We will be using in the summer, and also, help help wildlife on a local basis. But the change will be small. It will be local, and it will be very temporary. Every year we have 300 million tons of plastics produced, and half of this, it's single-use plastics. It's you will throw it away only after one use, and this yearly production is being added to about 8 billion tons of plastic that have been produced since the 50s, and almost all of the 1950s, and almost all of this plastic has found its way to the natural world. I mean, if we think which parts of our life are plastic, let's say, we will find out that our lives are being built with plastic and on plastic. Children's toys, contact lenses, our clothes, nylon, polyester, it's plastics. Car seats, our trainers, the shoes we wear, house paints. We also have liquid plastics, nail polish, mascara. All these are types of plastics. Now, and all this has really invaded every corner of this earth. Plastics have been found in the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest point in the ocean. It's 11 kilometers from the surface. You can find plastics in the Arabic desert, in the ice and snow in the Antarctics, in the snow in the Alps and in the Arctic cycle, in the guts of so many animal species like whales, cows, deers and camels. These are some of the animal species that are being found dead on a semi-regular basis with their stomachs filled with plastics. And the pollution from microplastics. Microplastics are small plastic particles. They have either been produced with that size, or they are fragments from bigger plastic products. And microplastics are plastic particles of less than 5 millimeters long. And we also have nanoplastics that are even smaller plastic pieces. And microplastics and nanoplastics are being found in the water we drink, in the salt, in honey, in almost all German beers, in the guts and the stomach and the flesh of fish, the fish we eat, the chicken. Microplastics are in the rain, in the air we breathe. It's everywhere, including our bodies, of course. I think there was one study revealing that we consume on average plastic equivalent of 1 credit card per week. So it's huge amounts of plastics. And one last thing on that. One huge problem with plastics is that it's not biodegradable. It does not break down to its constituent elements, carbon, hydrogen, etc. It breaks into smaller and smaller pieces. It reaches the micro and the nanoscale, but it does not biodegrade. So every piece of plastic ever made still exists on this planet and will continue to exist. and will continue to affect and kill wildlife. It will affect our health because the different type of plastics have different consequences on our health, including cancer, provoking cancer. There are endocrine disruptors. They mess with our endocrine system, and they even play a role in climate change, because plastics, when exposed to UV radiation, they emit methane and ethylene, and these are very dangerous greenhouse gases.
Another pandemic.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, do you think that recycling, or how do we deal with them, with the plastics?
So I've given you the figure of how much plastic is produced in the world. And another good figure to know is that only 9% of the plastic produced globally is being recycled, and all of the rest ends up one way or another in the water, in the earth, in the air, in the bodies of animals and humans. But even if we really invested heavily in recycling facilities, and we dramatically raised the amount of plastic we recycle, the problem would not be solved. First of all, much of the plastic produced is not recyclable. It is manufactured in a way that it can't be recycled. But also the plastic that can be recycled is recycled usually only once, and theoretically it could be recycled only a few more times, like 2 or 3 times, because plastic, unlike glass and metals, like including actually aluminium, it does not have an open recycling cycle. So recyclable plastics, after 1 or maybe 2 or 3 cycles of recycling, does end up in a landfill, or in the case where you don't have in countries where you don't have a waste management system or an efficient one, it will end up directly in the environment. And there are countries and there are businesses that promote the incinerating of plastic as a way of recycling. I mean, you can hear theories about waste to energy, burning plastic and converting this to electricity. But this is and this is practice in many countries, including Sweden. However, waste incineration and plastic incineration, even in the most modern incineration plants, produces toxic air pollutants. It produces dioxins, it produces furans, benzene, CFCs, and many other persistent organic pollutants that also are related to cancer, to neurotoxicity, and to really a number of very serious health problems. And also equally toxic and full of dangerous and toxic heavy metals is the bottom ash produced from the incineration process, and the long-term safe management of this toxic ash is practically impossible. It has been proven impossible.
Mm-hmm. So what do we do? I mean, the last few years, the one government after the other started banning plastic bags. However, we see the plastic bags everywhere, and now with the pandemic, we see the plastic gloves everywhere. Then some governments said that they will be banning plastic straws. There was an article today saying that the Greek government will ban single-use plastic, but when you go further in the article, it was saying, you know what, not all single plastic, and also they were urging the governments to use up their stock so that they don't buy any more plastic. And the government stay on this issue, like they propose this kind of ideas. Do you think that capitalism can save the problem that we have with plastic?
Well, the short answer is no. And of course, all these bans are good, but they are far, far from enough in order to address the problem. I mean, we have built our lives based on a material that affects our health, the health of animals, a material that does not biodegrade, that does not have an open recycling cycle, and contributes in many ways to the climate crisis. And what governments should have been doing is really, really having a plan to ban in the next couple of years, in the next 3 or 4 years, to ban single-use plastics, and then also have a plan for the gradual replacement of plastic in all of its uses in the near future. And they should be directing significant resources and funds to the research for safe and ecological alternatives to plastic. And some steps are have been made in that direction. I mean, in the direction of finding alternatives to plastic. There are companies producing packaging materials made of mushrooms. There are scientists that have produced fabric from banana peels, from sour milk, from different types of waste. And new ways have also been found to process traditional materials like wood. For example, the liquid wood technology allows wood to take shapes and properties which in the past would demand intense labor, skill, and high costs. And we can look, we have to look for alternatives in order to replace the multi-purpose and single-use plastic objects that, I mean, at this phase of technological, there are some plastic objects that, of course, we cannot at this stage replace, like, for example, in the field of medicine at this moment. But I think these examples show that there are alternatives for almost everything, every use we have on plastics. And we have to know, however, that there is no plant or natural material on this planet that can sustain without severe environmental consequences a culture that discards 500 billion single-use plastic caps annually. So we need to acknowledge that none of the natural materials or any renewable resource, none of that can sustain the overconsumption model of the advanced capitalist world. And it's a model that doesn't really have to do with the personal choices that people make, because millions of people live in poverty. This model has to do with the way capitalism and the markets are organized, and with the ideas that they cultivate and they promote. So we need to replace plastic, and we have to combine this with the rejection of single-use items and the throwaway culture. I mean, capitalism deliberately fosters single use with built-in obsolescence obsolescence.
That they go bad very fast, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like constantly changing fashion and doing minor upgrades, etc. And so it must be also combined with a rejection of the current consumption model in general in the developed world, cultivated by the capitalist industry, particularly the food and the fashion industries. And it's a model where, for example, we don't have enough hospital beds available, we don't have enough social housing. Uh, Capitalists claim that a better public education system cannot be afforded. We can't afford higher pensions, higher salaries in the public sector, etc. And at the same time, around 30% 30 to 50% of the food produced globally is thrown away before it reaches consumers. 30% of the clothes produced globally are never sold, and many industries, including H&M and Burberry's, but I don't think any of the viewers would buy Burberry's, but they end up burning them. So now, rejecting, of course, this the current consumption model does not mean that we aim, at lowering living standards or living a Spartan life. On the contrary, we have to aim to raise living standards for all workers, for all poor, and it means we have to, in order to do that, we have to redirect industrial and agricultural production, and at the same time cultivate a different value system in society, which is motivated not by profit, but by what is better for society, the health of the members of society, and of course nature, what is best for nature and the environment. So can capitalism really redirect and make the drastic changes needed to the economy and industrial production? I don't think it can. In the same way, we can't convince the plastic industry to invest in new technology. We can't convince the plastic industry to stop producing plastic. We can't convince the hydrocarbon industry to abandon hydrocarbons and turn to renewable energies and to renewable energy sources, or to hydrogen and other green technologies. And of course, we can't convince the 26 people that have as much wealth as half of the population of the whole earth to share it. So if we can't convince them, what we have to do is overthrow them and take power in our hands, put the power in the hands of the working class, and plan the society according to our needs.
Exactly. Yes, the banning would not be enough, but it has to be the repurposing of the whole industry. And we are the only ones that can be done. One example was Biome, but we don't have much time to discuss about it. But an occupied factory that repurposed the factory and survives in another way now. I want to go back a little bit to the lockdown. It has to do a little bit with this part of the discussion because during the lockdown we saw many pictures of the environment changing or cleaning, pictures of wild animals going into the cities, seas being clean, the air pollution levels to go down. And actually, many people during the lockdown created a hope that after the lockdown, we will go to a new situation, to a new era, that the governments and the capitalists will see how nice is our environment now, and that they will follow another line, or that we can go into a way of degrowth. So what do you think about this? First of all, can that happen? And on the second way, what did happen really?
So I think the lockdown reduced the amount of energy that was used. I mean, factories and businesses closed down. So, and there were no very few cars on the streets. And of course, all this reduced the fuel that was used and the energy in general that was used. And this had a temporary but quite a big impact in in the air quality and in the water quality in many parts of the earth. And in a way, it also showed how the way that nature could recover if we would take a different approach on production and growth. But this is not likely to continue. And even during the lockdown, there were many governments gave the, let's say, the opportunity, gave the liberty to a number of companies to produce without following the environmental standards. Trump issued a decree saying during the lockdown, companies do not have to worry about environmental controls or keeping the environmental standards. And this decree hasn't been taken back yet. And this is the example of the US, but this also happened in a number of countries. And I will come back to give an example from Greece in a moment. But we also have to take into account that the price of oil dropped immensely. I mean, it was the biggest, let's say, drop in history. And when companies, start going back into production, they will want to use the cheapest and most available form of fuel that exists. And they're not, I don't think that they're likely, they will be willing also to invest in different types of fuels and to renewable energy sources, especially during an economic crisis where the economy is so unstable. And I mean, we have entered I think the deepest economic crisis since the 30s, and some are saying it's even deeper. This crisis will be deeper than the economic crisis of the 1930s. So it's a time where it's not very likely that businesses will invest in renewable energy technologies and would rather use the cheapest form of fuel available and the form of fuel that is available in all supply chains at the moment. Of course, there could be a shift to renewable energies from some parts of the capitalists if governments provide incentives, like the EU is doing now. They're going to, they have been giving, and they will give more subsidies for renewable energy technologies. But the way these technologies are applied under capitalism, they're not applied in a way that helps the environment and helps nature recover, but they are applied in a way that actually inflict more harm in the environment.
Yeah, in
give
reality,
the
yeah, in the south, Cyprus also, they gave a lot of incentives to make renewable energy parks like wind farms and solar panel farms. But in reality, you pass from them and there is no wind at all where they put it, and it doesn't produce anything. The Cyprus is paying one of the biggest fines because of the use of mazout. So so it seems, do you think that this kind of incentives will help? Because, for example, in
no.
Cyprus, they said that they will give some green money, as we could maybe characterize it. But finally, when the government announced what they will do, they mentioned about roads and more concrete and squares full of concrete, etc. They didn't mention at all about energy saving or renewable energy plans.
Well, the problem under capitalism is that they give this money to businesses, and they decide what to build, where to build, and the decisions are not based, on really on science. They're based on how they will maximize their profits. Governments should be the ones planning planning how renewable energies in every country should be sorry, what's the word? Should work, let's say, because every country and every area has different needs. We should plan according to our needs, but also the plan should be according to the specific characteristics of each area. Instead of planning, putting wind farms where you actually have wind, and solar panels where you actually have sun, and also choosing between small scale instead of choosing small scale what's the word, renewable energy technologies instead of big scale, because sometimes you need to plan on a much smaller scale in order not to harm the environment. In Greece right now, what is happening is that they are planting wind farms everywhere. They're clearing forests. They're clearing forest mountaintops. They're even planting wind farms in Natura 2000 areas, in natural reserves. And of course, instead of helping the environment, they end up affecting the environment in a very very bad way, because wind farms are not supposed, for example, to be in the road of migratory birds, or wind farms are not supposed, if you put wind farms into a forest, you clear a big area. You also have to open a number of roads, and this affects the continuity of the forest, and it also affects all the species living in the forest. It's like transforming forests in small parks.
Wind farm forests.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in Greece, the government has used lockdown in order to bring a bill that clears the road for all the green capitalists.
Oop. Okay, we have a small technical problem. Again, something is wrong. Something is happening with the summer. I think the temperature is not helping us. Yes, we will wait for Eleni to connect as well. See if freezes. But can we hear her? No? Shall we play the intro? Yes. So I think that we cannot hear more about the new movements that are being created in Greece, but as I understand and what I would hope that we would hear from Eleni is that the actual consciousness of what the damage that these renewable energy forests, as we name them, are doing to the environment is being realized, and there are movements organized in order to stop them, as it was in Cyprus as well. In the last few years, we had many movements against the destruction of the environment, and this is very positive. Hopefully, this lockdown and the cleanup that happened can raise more of the consciousness. Hello, Eleni. I was just saying about the movements that exist about the environment and the need that we have to continue them and empower them.
Excellent.
You were saying about the wind farms, and I was about to ask you actually about the movement that has been created and the resistance to these plans.
It's very important. There are a number of local communities have mobilized against the installment of wind farms in protected areas, in natural reserves, etc. Some have been successful. I mean, they were able to stop the plans of the companies to destroy their areas. And I think this movement is growing, as also the environmental movement in general in Greece, because there are a number of attacks, not just the wind farm companies, but also waste incineration is a big issue, and there are some very important struggles against waste incineration. The struggle against gold mining also continues, like in Cyprus, and I think it's very important for all these movements, both in Greece but also in the Mediterranean and in the Balkans, to link to each other. It's the way big companies exploit the Southern Europe and the Southeast Mediterranean is similar, and I mean they don't hesitate to destroy our lives to make profit, and we have to link, organize, and work together. The workers, the youth, the environmental movement, in order to fight back.
Yes, it's very important. And in Cyprus, as I was saying before, there were many environmental movements. Some of them were really successful and they managed to stop the plans of the government. But some of them, they are not. And as we are a small island and we have similar struggles like in Greece and in Turkey against the mining, but also the natural gas, which we didn't have time to discuss today. But I would like very much to have another program with you and maybe some other comrades from around our area and the Eastern Mediterranean. That will be very interesting. And I think also that it's time after summer, most probably, because now everybody's getting into the new routine or into the old routine as a matter of holidays. Hopefully, most of the people will manage to do some. And from September, I hope that we will start again the program of Red Radio Show, that we can manage to do some activities and some programs that will encourage the collaboration between the movements of the area. Thank you very much, Eleni, for coming.
Thanks again for inviting me.
Very interesting program and very inspiring. And thank you very much all for watching one more episode and the last episode for the season of the Red Radio Show. We will take a break for the summer, and we will be back soon with more interviews, more discussions from abroad and from Cyprus, and more programs that can collaborate and bring new struggles to the forth, or discuss old struggles, history. We have to think about that. And for all you that liked our programs, of course, you can see them again, spread the word, but also visit our website, nedacy.wordpress.com, and of course, the ISA website that you can see going down. Listen to amazing music of Ubuntu Radio, and there is a lot of material there to accompany your summer, and see you soon in September. Bye.
Oy bu dağlar kimin? Oy Kaz Dağları, tanrıların yuvası. Oy Kaz Dağları, tanrıların yuvası. Kıyar mı insan toprağa suya, ne kalır yarınlara? Kıyar mı insan toprağa suya, ne kalır yarınlara?